Hi, my name's Annie Evans, and I am the Director of Education at New American History, which is a project from the University of Richmond. And today I'm going to share with you some of our digital resources that are intended for use in K-12 classrooms, but are now actually being used K-16 across the country. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of some of these resources, but I want you to know that you do have access to everything that I'm going to share with you through these interactive slides. The purpose of New American History is to imagine a new way for us to teach and learn and think about American history. These are some of our guiding principles that I use when I'm creating learning resources or providing professional learning for teachers and pre-service educators. So if these are in any way helpful to you, not only as you're going through the slides and listening to this presentation, but in your own work moving forward, developing your own digital resources for teaching and learning geography and American history. We believe that the two are intertwined and are best taught in tandem. So I hope that the maps that we're going to share with you and the learning resources will show you how we imagine that will work. This is our main website, New American History. We're a little over a year old. We launched in late January of 2020. And every month we change the content that appears on our website. We call these editions. All of the previous editions are archived. And I'm happy to do a separate presentation just on how to navigate the website and how we kind of archive that material. But I think for the purposes of today, we're going to kind of focus on the map resources. But I do hope that you'll spend some time going back to the website. We hope you'll sign up for our newsletter. We have a separate educator newsletter in addition to the New American History newsletter, which includes lots of great tips and resources to content for all of our partner collaborations. Just a brief overview. You can explore content by era. You can explore it by location. You can, as I said, look at previous editions. And then you can also find new content every month from our collaborative resources. One of our digital tools that we've developed is called Bunk. We're going to take a brief look at that. The main event of today's presentation will focus on American Panorama, which is our digital atlas. And then I'll be sharing some of the companion learning resources that we've developed to help teach the maps and also integrating content like Bunk. We'll also look at some of our podcast tools and resources, Backstory, and now a new one that we are supporting called Seizing Freedom. And we'll also include some content for teaching geoliteracy through video through a series called The Future of America's Past. And again, everything is linked into the slides. The links on the slides take you directly out to each of the maps and resources as we share them. This is just an example of the learning resource library. You can navigate it by topic. I put in geolocation to show some of the learning resources that specifically focus on maps. This is just a small sampling of those. You can also look by reading level. We Lexile the learning resources so that if you have students who are reading on various degrees of reading levels within any course, as most teachers do, then you can find an appropriate resource to share with them. We also search by national standards, and we also have ways for you to search by teaching strategies, such as if you're trying to incorporate more civic engagement or civil discourse. We have collaboration strategies built in. You'll see some of the different topics over here on the right. You'll see the grade levels, but we've also want to talk to you about things like literacy skills. So you can search in lots of different ways as you're navigating through your learning resources. So this is Bunk. Bunk is a connection engine. It changes on a daily basis. The idea behind Bunk is that we are integrating the best journalism, op-ed pieces, audio, video, original pieces that we have written. And through an elaborate tagging system, students are able to make connections. They can make connections between past and present. They can create their own collections of content. They can You can send out an assignment with some digital content that you want them to think about with inquiry-based questions. So I'm going to come out of presenter mode just for a moment and take you out to the live site because it really works best if you can see it. So this is the Bunk homepage today. I'm recording this in late February. I think you'll be viewing it in March. So the homepage most likely won't look the same, but just so you can get a feel for it. For anything that you click on, it takes you out to an excerpt of that article. If it's an article, if it were a video, the video would be embedded right there on the site. Or if it was a piece of audio, there would be a player that you could click on to easily access that podcast or audio content. But where the real magic happens is over here with these connections. So here are cards, and you can see these icons. You can make connections to other pieces of content within Bunk that has the same idea. So we'll take a look at some of those connections. Each time that you make those connections, you see these tags. The tags lead you out to yet more content. So we have 27 pieces of tag content right now with the topic of Japanese Americans. If you go back out and continue to go through the cards, then you'll notice how those items change. You can share that connection with someone through social media. You can email it. You can cut and paste it into an assignment for students to explore. So that's Bunk in a nutshell. There's a lot more that we can do with Bunk as well, but I think if you take some time to explore it, you'll find it's a very useful tool for integrating history and geography. I'm going to go back over to our slides now. In addition to Bunk, we have, as I mentioned before, we have audio content. So Backstory ran for over 12 years, a very popular history-themed podcast hosted by our executive director, Ed Ayers, along with other colleagues from UVA and other universities. There's a lot of really terrific backstory content that is related to geography. One that I found that I have used with my students was this episode on the history of mapping that I wanted to draw your attention to. The nice thing about Backstory is that it's divided up into segments. Each of those segments, you can download the transcript. So students can follow along on the transcript. You could have them annotate the transcript, highlight key vocabulary. For students with disabilities, it's often helpful for them to follow along with the transcript. And the audio plays right within there. So we're just going to take a very quick listen to a section that I really thought was interesting, where they talked about a Native American map.
Now, in the 18th century, France, Spain, and England were busy elbowing each other for control of the New World. And mapmakers in each country were happy to do their part. English mapmakers drew their colony of Virginia, stretching from the Atlantic all the way to the Mississippi. French mapmakers showed their territory spanning from present-day Ohio to North Dakota, all the way down to Louisiana.
So you get the idea. I have found that kids really respond well to audio content. If you're using a flipped classroom type of learning style, then you can send these clips home for students to listen to on their devices. And then you can talk about them the next day in the classroom. We have a new podcast that we are supporting called Seizing Freedom. Dr. Ayers is the executive producer, but this one is hosted by Kadada Williams. And it is, to me, it's almost like audio theater. It reminds me of my grandparents talking about how they used to sit around and listen to stories on the radio before there was television. And so what I'm excited about is that these are the stories of people who, during the time of emancipation and Reconstruction, were telling their own stories. So they use diaries, they use journals, they use archives, they have audio actors who are reenacting scenes based on these primary source documents. But what I think this group will be particularly interested in is this exciting map that they have built in. So for every episode, you can actually follow along on the map. So for example, episode 1 is called A Powerful Black Hand. And parts of that episode take us out to Eastern Shore, Virginia. So when you zoom in on the map, it gives you a little bit of context about the story. So in this section of the podcast, they talk about Harry Jarvis, who escaped from Eastern Shore, Virginia, and ended up at Fort Monroe. So I really love this interactive map aspect as an additional layer to use with students who are enjoying the podcast. So I think that's a very rich feature for that as well. We also have a television series that's hosted by Dr. Ayers called The Freedom of America's Past, or excuse me, The Future of America's Past. Freedom's Fortress was the inaugural episode. Another one that takes place here in Virginia, where I am located, is called School Interrupted. It's about the Moton School walkout. But there are 8 episodes total, and I like to think of these as virtual field trips. And for each episode, we have developed a robust inquiry-based learning resource that utilizes the digital content and integrates things like Bunk and some of our maps. So that's just another piece of content that you can use. But the main thing that I think most folks are interested in hearing about today is American Panorama. This is our digital atlas of American history. It's produced by the Digital Scholarship Lab at the University of Richmond. And I'm going to spend the rest of the time kind of sharing some of these maps with you. We have several, as you look over here on the left. I've embedded screenshots with links out to each of the maps for you so that you can explore them on your own time. But I'm going to go ahead and just demonstrate some of them very briefly to give you a feel for the different types of maps and features that we have included in there. So the first map I'm going to take us out to is electing the House. This is the learning resource for electing the House. So it provides step-by-step directions for students. This is what we call the teacher view, and we include teaching tips in there along with the vocabulary. Here is just some screenshots that shows you and show your students how to navigate the maps. We pretty much set this up so it could be done in a flipped classroom, not knowing how much remote learning would come into play less than 2 months after we launched our website. But we've been told that it's been very, very user-friendly for students working at home in a remote learning setting or working with a partner through Zoom in a breakout room. So there's lots of different ways that you can use the learning resources, both in face-to-face instruction and for hybrid or remote learning. But we do try and walk the students through. My best suggestion is that if students are working in pairs, they sit side by side. One of them has the learning resource up on their device. The other one has the live map. If they're working in a remote setting, then they would want to toggle back and forth between the 2 tabs. So I'm going to take us out to the live map now. And I've kind of centered this since you are tuning in to this presentation from Oregon. I have tried to center the map on the Oregon 5th District, where I believe your university is located. And what I love about this map is kids begin to see patterns. So this is all of the House of U.S. Representative elections from 1840 to the 2010 2018 midterm elections. We'll be updating it for the 2020 elections soon. But students begin to see things like, when were there flipped districts? When did Democrats, Republicans change ownership? So in your particular district, it looks like somewhere around the 1980, they may have done some redistricting, which is why the lines here only show up for since 1980. That indicates that there was some sort of redistricting that occurred. So you can have students look at it as a map, as a cartogram. They can also look at it for not only the winner in the cartogram mode, but also strength of victory. Was it a close race, or was there a clear and definite winner by a large margin? So this is great for a civics class, for a government class, but also using in a geography class, looking at geopolitical themes. Another map that we've used quite a bit with students, especially in the last few years, is our map of foreign-born populations. So again, we have a learning resource with step-by-step directions. It provides links directly out to the map for the students. This is again what we call the teacher view, because we give some information like standards and teaching tips, but students don't really need that. So all of our learning resources also have a button here that takes you to what's called the student view. And that gets straight to the heart of the content without bogging students down with the teacher tips and the standards and that type of thing. So again, you'd want to have students have this up on their desk and then have another tab open, or a partner with a second device looking at the live map so they can follow along. So here's the live map. Again, I've kind of framed it here in Oregon to show you. This is showing you in 2010 where the majority of immigrants came from that region of your state. If you slide the slider tool back, you see how the map changes so kids can look at historically. It looks like the 1960s is where there was the largest influx of immigrants coming. Large numbers from Canada, that makes sense, they're our closest neighbor, but an extremely large Russian, second largest was for coming from the USSR at the time. So perhaps you can look for evidence on your cultural landscapes. Where are you seeing Russian sounding names, Russian owned businesses? Is there evidence of, Russian culture in these communities? Same thing with German, UK, Sweden, Norway, and Mexico, those being the largest immigrant populations. Do you still see evidence of that on the landscape? It looks like here in the 1970s, you saw a pretty significant drop in the number of immigrants coming. And it would be interesting to have students go back and research why. They can also kind of do a reverse version. They can click on a country and see where else were people from that country going, not just to the United States. So there's a lot of different ways that students can utilize that map as well. Another map that I wanted to share is probably the most famous map in our collection, and that map is called Mapping Inequality. This is the learning resource for Mapping Inequality. It does include the student view as well. I would say that this map has gained particular notice since last summer with the Black Lives Matter protest. That broke out across the country. It had been gaining popularity for a number of years, but we literally received 1 million hits this summer on this one map. And we do believe that was a direct result of several instances of people dying at the hands of police brutality, and a very large number of cities engaging in Black Lives Matter protests, and the national dialogue on race relations and inequality and social justice. So this learning resource has also been used quite a bit, as you can imagine, since those events happened during this school year. The live map here I'll take you out. Now, you need to understand that in the 1940s, when the original Hulk redlining reports were done, these were for the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and only states with 40,000 people or more in population were part of this program, where the lenders and the federal government got together and decided that they were going to rate certain communities on whether or not they were a good credit risk. So you can see down here in the map key, the best was highlighted in green. Blue was considered still desirable, what we would probably consider middle class. Yellow was what they considered declining, meaning that they were beginning to be run down. They were beginning to be a risk on whether or not banks should loan money to people purchasing homes in that area. And then red was considered hazardous and definitely not a good credit risk. And that's where the term redlining comes from, because as we'll see when we click on different parts, these polygons that were drawn to rate the neighborhood. So each neighborhood was color coded. And so, for example, here it describes area A as a hot spot. Good mortgage lenders with available funds would be very willing to make maximum loans here. But in the yellow areas, they're characterized infiltration, which was another euphemism that they used, meaning people of color or high immigrant populations. It said good mortgage lenders are more conservative in grade C areas than they would have been in the A or B. And then red, again, where the term redlining comes from, these lines that they drew around certain sections of the city, characterized by detrimental influences. And we'll take a look at what they were defining as detrimental influences. You'll see over here, these are remarks that are embedded in the original scan documents, just, transcribing them. So I'm going to go ahead and click on a red neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. And you can see the original primary source document. Here's an original scan. You can zoom in on it. And we can read some of these clarifying remarks. Why did they deem this a red zone or not a good place to loan? And it talks about Portland's melting pot and calls it a slum district. It talks about 3/4 of the Negro population in the city live here. And then over here, it talks about there are 300 Orientals, 1,000 Southern Europeans, and Russians. So if you think back to that foreign-born map that we looked at earlier, you can kind of start to connect those pieces. So these were all populations that were considered undesirable, not good credit risks. It says many improvements in the dilapidated condition and maintenance in general is poor quality throughout. So these were the areas why these are the reasons why they gave it a low red grade. The other maps that are related to this, to mapping inequality, include urban renewal maps. So after this period of redlining, when this program concluded, in the next decade and a half, we now see this idea of urban renewal. So they've identified the yellow and red zone areas in the Hulk redlining program that they considered undesirable. So then the government decides in the 50s and 60s that they're going to use and public domain, eminent domain, to come in and bulldoze over some of these neighborhoods to make room for better housing, which would be then in turn a better risk for lenders. It would be more profitable for developers. So if we go back to that Portland area, you'll see that there are a number of neighborhoods. This identifies ones living in poverty, what we would consider subsidized housing. We also can put a layer showing those redlined areas that we previously explored in the last map. And you can see when you click on that area, how many families were displaced. So families of color on the bar graph in the bottom right corner are indicated in the purple, white families in the green. And you can see where 120 families were displaced, 104 of them were of color, only 16 were white. If you were to go to another neighborhood, you would see similar results. This is the South Auditorium area. 480 families were displaced. Now, this one is a little different. This one, only 52 of color, 428 were white. It would be interesting to go back and see of that population, how many of them were immigrant families. So this is just, another way that you can kind of connect these two maps. And then to bring it up to the present, we have two newer pieces of scholarship. This one is called Not Even Past. And what it does is it takes the formerly identified neighborhoods on the original Hulk maps and it brings it up to today. So it uses something called the social vulnerability scale. And it takes a look at, here are the neighborhoods that were rated by Hulk. And on the right-hand side, these maps were recently created to show where are those neighborhoods now in terms of property values and what are modern day mortgage lenders and realtors thinking. It also goes back to what is the quality of life impacted for families who are living in these communities. So if we were to look at one of these yellow or red neighborhoods from the past, it may take a minute for it to load. I apologize. If we take a look at one of these neighborhoods, for example, this is a yellow neighborhood. You'll see that it still is in the yellow, but it's kind of inching up towards the green. So perhaps there have been some improvements in that particular neighborhood. Here's a neighborhood, same thing. We see it was borderline yellow. Now it's kind of hinging on the green in 2020. Over here, we've got a green neighborhood. And you can see that the neighborhoods in green, for the most part, staying in green. Some of those blue neighborhoods have apparently increased in value. The yellow neighborhoods, some of them have moved in the green, but a lot of them have sharply declined into the red. So this gives people a chance to kind of look at how redlining continues to impact communities, even though there's no formal redlining policies still in place. We know it's been illegal to do that sort of thing for a very long time, since the 1960s with the Fair Housing Act. However, many cities still and states still have racial covenants embedded into the property contracts. And these are antiquated laws that have just never been bothered to be taken off the books. Where I live in Virginia, it was just now in July of 2020 when they literally passed a law saying racial covenants must be stricken from all previous contracts, so that they are now null and void, and should not be passed on from owner to owner. And that just happened this past July, which was very surprising to many of our students. And the last little bit I want to show you is this was an article that appeared in the New York Times, where the people at our Digital Scholarship Lab, along with the Science Museum of Virginia, have been mapping out heat islands, which are places where there were not a lot of shade trees, as you can imagine, in these low-income neighborhoods during the 30s and 40s when the New Deal Hulk Map program was in place. People were not investing in landscaping and shade trees. And so a lot of those neighborhoods that were in the low income areas of town, the redlined neighborhoods, today, people living in those areas, as we saw in that previous map, they suffer from all kinds of health conditions, because of decades, generations of growing up in these areas where they don't have access to green spaces. Many of them are living in isolated places where they are in what are called food deserts, where they do not have access to good medical care. And so the new map that was just released this summer is called The Lines That Shape Our Cities. And what they did here, this is a story map and you can scroll through it. But the part that many students have been very interested in is kind of this word cloud, where they literally took all of the text from those scanned documents that I showed you with the mapping and equality maps, and they put all of the vocabulary from those clarifying remarks into a word cloud and then mapped the most used words onto each section of the map. So if you look in the blue and green neighborhoods, you see words like golf clubs and shade trees and shrubbery and landscaped and trees. But if you look at the yellow and red neighborhoods, you see the word hazard, sewage, industrial waste, dump, obnoxious, industry, a lot of paved surfaces, flood zones. And so you begin to paint the picture of, where is the city or the county that you live in investing in these properties and in these neighborhoods, and how does that impact the quality of life? So this is a really, really interesting story map to explore, to kind of show students, take them from the 1930s and the Hulk program. It gives them the history. It provides interactive timelines that they can scroll through. So it really is a remarkable piece of scholarship, and it looks at a variety of cities. Oakland, California, for example, St. Louis. And so students begin to see that these are patterns that are all across the country. The newest map in our Panorama collection is based on a book written by our director, Ed Ayers, along with Justin Madra and Nathaniel Ayers from the Digital Scholarship Lab. And this story map is a companion piece to the book Southern Journey. The book is excellent. I highly recommend it. It has over 100 color maps. And the text really digs deep into looking at migration patterns from the earliest inhabitants, the indigenous populations, all the way up through COVID-19. But this is a heat map showing during the time of emancipation, where people were living in proximity to military bases. A lot of the formerly enslaved or runaway slaves shortly before emancipation were seeking shelter at military bases. And so this is kind of mapping that information out for students. Here we look at the refugee camps in various areas and where they were taking in enslaved populations for safety reasons, so that they could not be recaptured. And then once emancipation occurred, we can see where people settled very close proximity to these bases, finding a sense of security there. As we move through, the way that these maps work is the areas in blue are where people were leaving, and the areas in copper were where people were migrating to. And we look at white population change and Black population change. And then eventually, when we get to more recent times, we actually map out Hispanic, Latinx, Asian American populations as well. So students can go through, there's a variety of maps, there are slider tools embedded in here for students to make comparisons. This one is people living in small towns, looking at the percentage of population from 1880s to 1900 and talking about how the invention of the railroad kind of changed the cultural landscape in those small towns as we started becoming more interconnected. So that is just a very, very brief preview of some of our maps. Here are the learning resources to go with the first part of Southern Journey. That we have 2 more that will be added to our website very soon to help students learn how to navigate the maps. I hope this has been a useful overview. I, again, want to share with you that all the links to all of the maps and some of the ones that we didn't even get to look at in this video, for example, the COVID maps, those are all embedded in the story map, but you also have these slides that you may use with your classes that you may embed into Canvas courses or Google Classroom. Everything that we do does have a common OER license, so that Creative Commons license, so that you know and your district IT folks know that you have permission to use our slides, use our learning resources, use our maps, use content from Bunk. We want these to be useful tools to teachers, and we want you to be able to remix them and use them to best serve the needs of your students. If you have questions, we would love it if you'd follow us on social media, subscribe to our newsletters. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address is included here in the slides. Again, you have access to the slides. The bit.ly is here on the first slide, and you can share that bit.ly with your students as well. Or again, you can make copies of this slide deck and use whatever images would be most helpful in your instruction. We would love it if you would give us some feedback. If you are on Twitter, we'd love for you to give us, tell us which one of the maps you're most excited to explore first, or maybe use in a future learning experience. You can tag us at New American Hist, at American Pano, or you could use the hashtag C-GEO. We would love to hear from you, and I hope that you found this presentation helpful, and good luck. We would love to work and collaborate with you in the future.